Welcome back to the Triathlon Training Explained show, powered by Training Peaks, and this week we're addressing the issue of overtraining.
Yeah, as triathletes, it's so hard to find that balance between training hard, so getting fitter and stronger, with recovery. Now, I know I can be guilty of, and I don't think I'm alone, in sometimes reducing my rest and recovery just so that I can fit in all my training around my working week.
Yeah, I've been there. I've overtrained and even had glandular fever as a result. So I can certainly talk from my own experience. And as triathletes, we do tend to push ourselves to the limit. We tend to ignore recovery and the signs of overtraining. And the results can be pretty devastating.
And it can be a little bit confusing trying to know if maybe you're just a little bit tired from that hard session or if those are signs of fatigue. Now, we're going to be delving into this topic, speaking to some experts and giving you our opinions as well. Well, we've had so many questions on this topic, but before we go and speak to the experts, we thought we'd have a bit of a discussion from our own experiences.
Yeah, so I actually dug myself a pretty deep hole when I was a swimmer prior to triathlon. I was about 15, 16 years old at the time, and I was going swimming, I was getting up before 5 a.m. most mornings, swimming for 2 hours, going straight to school, then back to the pool for land training, then swimming another couple of hours. And initially, results were great, and then eventually I started to burn out and, well, I was just a broken man basically. And there was a small group of us in the same situation. We were getting ill, ignoring those signs and just training through because that's what you did. You never missed your training. But I got to the point that I couldn't sleep, although all I wanted to do was sleep. I couldn't get my heart rate up, I felt flat, and my times were getting slower. Now, I wish I didn't have to go through all of that, but I did learn a lot from it, and I actually train a lot differently now, and I keep a much better track on my body and how it responds.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do have to go through it, and I didn't have quite such an obvious fatigue as you did, I suppose, but mine was later on in my career. I'd gone through swimming 10 times a week and survived that, but it wasn't until later on, and I just got to the stage where I was constantly flat and lethargic, and I didn't want to go training, and it wasn't just because I was being lazy, and I kind of, it felt like I was unfit, but I wasn't because I'd been training hard, so I knew that I was fit. And eventually, went and spoke to the nutritionist, and he did bloods. And because I'd had regular bloods throughout my pentathlon career, we then had a blood profile to look at. And it wasn't until sort of going back over that and seeing there were certain markers that were lower than normal for me, but also lower than what the recommended amount should be. And it was especially my iron levels and my hemoglobin levels, which can be quite common in women. And I hadn't had that problem before, but it was there in black and white and I couldn't argue with it. But on the positive side, once I knew what it was that I needed to address, then I worked with a nutritionist, I changed my diet a little bit, added in some supplements, and it was amazing how quickly my body reacted, and actually my training and my form soon came back.
Well, that's actually why we're here. So hopefully you guys don't have to go through the same experiences we have. So firstly, we thought we'd chat to someone that's looking after some of the top athletes.
Yeah, well, at the moment, the Commonwealth Games are on in Australia, so quite a lot of the coaches are away. But I found the next best thing and went to speak to a rowing coach. Now, you might think, why rowing? Well, actually, they have really intense hours. They do rigorous training.
Quite similar to triathlon.
It is, yeah, in that sense. So I wanted to find out what signs they look for overtraining and how they stop their athletes getting fatigued. And for that, I went to speak to GB rowing coach Dan Harris. So Dan, if you can start by just telling me, how do you monitor your athletes and look for signs of overtraining?
So the main thing that we get our athletes to do every morning, they fill in it's a morning monitoring document, and that has their waking heart rate, body weight, and also things like their current mood, like how they're feeling, like a general sort of well-being and feeling ranked, just from 1 to 10. So that sort of gives an idea of just how they're waking up feeling, as well as the actual data like their weight and heart rate.
And what signs are you looking for within that?
So quite a key one is their heart rate, if that's significantly spiked. So we say anything like 7 or over, that needs a discussion. Usually 10 or over is a definite either like completely back off training or no training that day. And usually if it's 10 or more, they quite often have more other symptoms as well that are quite obvious, whether it's illness or a bit of a sore throat, that sort of thing.
And how do you then prevent the overtraining sort of happening?
So yeah, we have that monitoring tool that we just keep check on, but I think the best thing really is just the open discussion with the athletes. So obviously programming, trying to be quite like sensible, but as sensible as you can with the programming. But just the open discussion daily with the athletes, just checking how they are, how they're feeling, because they're going to go through phases of fatigue, and you want that with the program, but it's just making sure they don't end up in a rut where they're just not able to get out of it, really.
And if you do ever sort of, an athlete gets to that stage and you haven't managed to sort of stop them getting completely overtrained, how do you then bring them back from that? How do you help them with their recovery?
Yeah, so we have a really good support network that we are able to access doctors and stuff like that, so we use the input from them as well. But essentially, initially we found that you have to just completely back right off, get healthy in a way in like normal life, so able to sleep well, able to eat well, and just like find normal life easy, and then we'll just integrate them back into training really steadily.
Now, I used to be pretty old school with my training, but after another bout of overtraining as a result of my glandular fever in the past, I decided that clearly wasn't working. And that's around the time that I started working with Matthew Bottrell, a renowned cyclist and also a coach of some of the top athletes out there, likes of Lucy Charles, Tim Don, Rachel Joyce, and others. Now, he really opened my eyes to how you can track your data from your training and actually be a lot smarter with your training, particularly through the use of training peaks. So I caught up with Matt earlier to discuss this. Okay, Matt, you work more from an online and data perspective. How do you go about monitoring your athletes' training and make sure that they're not overtraining?
So one of the most powerful tools that we use on the Training Peaks platform is the performance management chart. So what we're able to track by that is obviously the TSS scores that they're getting from each of these the sessions.
And that's the stress per session.
Yeah, the training stress per session. So each training zone acquires a certain amount of points, and that's what, that's building what we call like this CTL value, that you'll see on the performance management chart. And kind of what's happening is these TSS points are building, the CTL value, and everybody's kind of got this reach point where they'll actually peak out of time. And if you overreach that, what's actually happening is the ATL, the acute training load, is building. But also we've got like what we call TSB, which is the form. So if you imagine like 0 being fresh, the more negative you get, then the more stress that you're getting.
So I'm guessing during a training block, the training load and the fatigue is going up, the form's coming down. So to allow your body to adapt and improve, you want to allow that fatigue to come back down and the form to go back up?
Yeah, definitely. But what happens when people overreach is they just overtrain, their acute training load is going up more and more, and this TSB is getting so negative. You start reaching those elements where you're hitting like minus 50 for a number of weeks and it's depreciating even more. Then all of a sudden, you're going to hit this brick wall. And sometimes you can get out of that, but if you push it too much, then that's when, you overreach, and we can, that can build a lot of fatigue.
Working closely with your coach and using various online trackers such as the Training Peaks app that Matt talked about are great ways to measure your recovery and your training. But sometimes you need to look beyond the numbers, and nutrition is actually a really important area. Now, I went to speak to my old nutritionist Nathan Lewis from the English Institute of Sport, and I asked him if poor nutrition can actually affect fatigue.
Yes, almost certainly it can, Heather. There's a number of different areas that are directly relevant to influencing fatigue. For starters, keeping it nice and simple, it's really important that the athlete eats sufficient carbohydrate. So we know that not consuming sufficient carbohydrate during heavy training periods will increase fatigue, adversely affect mood and recovery. Protein is really important as well. We know protein's crucial for repair and recovery. The athlete is more likely to experience increased muscle damage and inflammation without sufficient protein. Fruits and vegetables, maybe not as obvious to many athletes, but we know from research studies where fruits and vegetables have been restricted for short periods of time, as little as 2 weeks, we see increase in fatigue, increased inflammation. So fruits and vegetables are really, really important, so plant-based foods. And then finally, of course, the vitamins and minerals. And certainly there's some key micronutrients there. Micronutrient deficiencies that may present with fatigue would include things like iron, magnesium deficiency, and certainly vitamin D as well, which of course we get from sunlight at certain times of the year.
So, I mean, that's great. You've part answered my second question already, but what maybe more in actual food consumption might be lacking if someone's showing fatigue? What foods would you maybe want to check that they're eating?
Well, we did some interesting research over a number of years where we looked at athletes that have been medically diagnosed by a sports physician with what we call unexplained underperformance syndrome, or overtraining syndrome. And we found, certainly in the athletes that were diagnosed with that condition, that they had lower blood levels of dietary antioxidants. So antioxidants that reflected their intake of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. They had lower levels than the healthier athletes. And it may be over time, through chronically consuming a poor intake of fruit and veg, that they experienced poor recovery.
Oh, that's did not know that at all. Finally, and again, you've probably part answered that already, but what would you actually recommend people do if they are beginning to get fatigue or have overtraining? What can they address quickly with their diet?
Sure. I mean, in an ideal scenario, it'd be great for them to meet with a recognised professional and have their diet sort of formally assessed. But first of all, they should certainly have a look at their protein intake in terms of quantity, in terms of timing, very important, and the different types of proteins. I'd also suggest they have a quick look at their diet from a perspective of these dietary antioxidants, like consuming 7 or 8 serves of fruits and vegetables a day. Is it a nice plant-rich diet that's also being complemented with dairy and with meat and fish sources? I mean, very interestingly, a group of researchers going back 20 years looked at fatigue in a group of Olympic athletes and found lower levels of certain concentrations of amino acids. But actually, they restored the levels of amino acids in the blood of the athletes, and the fatigue resolved with just increasing the amount of milk in their diet. They gave them an extra, I think it was 25 grams of milk protein a day, and over several weeks they recovered. So, there's some basic aspects that you can do quite well.
Now, I've already discussed the use of blood tests in my career in helping to identify fatigue, but it can be quite hard to come by, and your local GP is probably not going to be able to test for the markers that you need and then give you the analysis and the support that you need following up that relates it to your sport.
Well, actually, later in my career, I came across 4 for Life. So go onto their website, you can order a pack when it comes through, prick your finger, send the sample back, and then a few days later, you just log online onto their website and you can see your results and feedback. And it's actually, there's a few companies out there doing a similar thing, so it is becoming more accessible. But I'll be honest, we're a little bit out of our depth when it comes to talking about blood tests and the markers that we should be looking out for. So I actually spoke to Sarah Bolt, the founder of 4 for Life, earlier. All right, Sarah, when people are having blood tests with yourself, what are the specific markers that you're looking out for in blood tests that might highlight overtraining?
With the training load, there's about 5 core markers that you would look at. The most important one is cortisol, which is a steroid hormone, which is released in the body at times of stress. So that's the first one you'll look at. The other markers that you would look at as well alongside that are white blood cell count. If you're overtraining, your white blood cell count will drop very low, meaning that you're more prone to get illnesses. Okay. Other markers you can look at as well around inflammation. So those would be CRP, C-reactive protein, and also ferritin, which is a protein. People usually look at ferritin for the amount of stored iron they have in their blood, but it's actually, ferritin also is an inflammation marker, so that will rise as well at times if you are overtraining too much. Okay,
so say someone does have a blood test with yourself through 4 for Life, or Fourth Edge for the athletes out there. What would they do? What is kind of like the process after that, those first findings they've had after the test?
Well, the first thing for them to do really is establish what their baseline. So they need to know what their markers, what the levels of those markers are when they're resting. Then they can know actually when they actually are overdoing it, how far those have risen. So the important point is to first establish a baseline number and then track ongoing. And that's the key really, is to keep tracking your markers over time. And you can track during a recovery period as well. During a recovery period, your markers should return back to baseline. So if you're not seeing this, then you know that you're overtraining.
Okay, so it is really specific to each individual. So whilst like one blood test is really important and can be very useful, actually it's kind of a case of having regular tests throughout the year to see how they track individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, everyone is an individual. So it's about establishing what is normal for you. So it's really key that you establish that resting number for yourself, especially around cortisol. I mean, if you're training a lot, then you'll always expect cortisol will rise, but it needs to return back to baseline when you're actually during your recovery period. If that isn't happening, you know that you're probably overdoing it.
Well, beyond having a coach or a detailed blood test, there's actually a number of markers that you can track from day to day quite easily to help prevent you from overtraining.
Yeah, I mean, an old school way, you can literally record your sleep, so what time you go to sleep, what time you wake up, and use a diary writing how that felt. Or you can take it a step further. There's now lots of ways of tracking your sleep with apps. I personally use the Polar M430 because it continually tracks my sleep, so it tells me when I had interruptions throughout the night. But there's lots of apps you can get for your phone, and most of these will link directly to your Training Peaks account, so you can see the overall picture. And fatigue can often show in signs of actually, like you've mentioned earlier, not sleeping very well. But also, if you're not having enough sleep, you could end up finding that you're leading towards fatigue as well.
Another area is to monitor your heart rate to see how your body is dealing with the stress of training. It's been used by athletes for years. You simply take your heart rate when you first wake in the morning. You need to do this quite regularly though, so you can find out sort of your baseline normal resting heart rate. So then if you see a significant increase in the heart rate, you know that your body's working harder than normal and you're potentially trying to fight off an illness.
And you can take this a step further actually by measuring your heart rate variability, or HRV as it's known. Now this measures the difference in time between each contraction, so between each heartbeat. And if you do it consistently, it's actually a really good marker to show signs of fatigue. But you do need a heart rate monitor that's specific for this. Now the interesting thing about HRV, that actually the lower the number is actually a sign that it's bad. So you want to have a higher number which shows better adaptation to your training, and meaning that basically you're in better shape.
This is such a vast topic and one that we've really enjoyed looking into actually. There are loads of methods out there to help prevent you from overtraining, and they're becoming increasingly more accessible.
Yeah, that doesn't mean though that you can forget about how you feel and listening to your own body. So know what is normal for you, and it still makes up a large part of the puzzle. Now, if you haven't done so yet and you want to subscribe, just hit the globe. And if you want some tips on how to fit your training in around your work and your busy life, then there's a video on that just here.
And to help prevent you from overtraining, why not check out our first Triathlon Training Explained show on structured training? You see that by clicking here.